So tonight we have Hana Bendcowsky, Israelis and Jewish-Christian dialogue, old problems, new challenges. Thank you, Hana.
Okay, so thank you very much for having me for this session, Hanan, and it's a pleasure to be with you, and it's a pleasure to see some very familiar faces from close and from long distance. I think, well, some of you have heard this presentation already, but maybe there's some new insights and new questions, so I'll be happy if you would share it. So I'll just introduce myself a little bit, and then I'll get to the topic. So I'm the director of the program within the Rossing Center. The Rossing Center started as the Jerusalem Center for Jewish-Christian Relations. That was 16 years ago by late Daniel Rossing. It was in Tantur where it was established. And we had our office in Tantur for a couple of years. And it started as an organization that focused on dialogue between Christian and Jews in the special context of the Holy Land. And the reason why Daniel Rossing decided he wants to establish an organization that focuses on dialogue between Christian and Jews in the context of the Holy Land is exactly what I'm going to talk about today, because there is a need for something special here. But later, Daniel passed away 10 years ago, and after he passed away, the organization was expanded. We expanded our activity. We started to work in other fields, not just Jewish-Christian dialogue, and therefore we changed also the name. So it's the Rossing Center for Education and Dialogue. And I take the opportunity to invite you tomorrow to another webinar we're doing at 8 o'clock. So an hour earlier. I'm just adding now the invitation. It's about dialogue and between dialogue and action. So going from just talking to doing things, and we'll have a Muslim, Christian, and a Jew talking about their experience in interfaith dialogue and activity. So you're welcome to join tomorrow. And most of my work is mainly educational work, and I'm going to explain what we're doing and what I'm specifically doing, but it's mainly educational work, and I will talk more from my perspective as a Jew. I would present also some Christian, Palestinian, Arab perspective, but as I would like to present things from my perspective. And I would say a few words about my personal background. I'm an Israeli. I grew up in Israel, lived in Israel all my life, didn't know anything about other religions, except for Judaism, until I got to university. And then I enrolled in history, in the history department. And in order to learn European history, you have to know something about Christianity. And for those of you who have some interaction with Israeli Jews, you know that the little we know is something about Christmas trees, Santa Claus, and there was something about Mary, but that's about it. And I had to take an introductory course about Christianity, and it was fascinating because for me, it's like learning another language and being able to understand my world, because we live in a very Western culture, and I watch American television and American films and European literature and art and music, and you cannot really understand that without knowing anything about Christianity. And actually, you cannot understand Judaism without knowing anything about Christianity, because Judaism did not develop in a vacuum. It developed in dialogue and conflict with Christianity. So it actually helped me to understand better my own world. So I switched my studies, and I graduated from the Comparative Religions department, but I realized that if I really want to learn something about Christianity, the best way to do that is just to wander around the old city. So that's what I do if there's no epidemic and I can actually walk freely in the street. Now we're in lockdown, so I'm at home. But what I try to do since then is introducing the old city and the Christian quarter to Israeli Jews and also to Christians who come from usually Western background and have very little experience with the Eastern churches and the complexity of the Holy Land. And one of the things we managed to do with Daniel in the past and after he passed away, also with the great staff we have today, is to analyze and find the reason why Jewish-Christian relations in the Holy Land are so different, and why we're talking about the old problems, but the new challenges that Jewish-Christian relations don't have in other parts of the world. So I will share my presentation, and I will become just a little cube in the corner of your screen. Okay. And yeah, okay. So here you have the logo of the Rossing Center, and now the JCJCR is a department within the Rossing Center. Now I will stop once in a while for question. I will leave, we can have a discussion at the end, but there will be some points in the middle where I would stop and say if someone has a question. I know that there are certain points in the lecture that people just need to ask. There's an urge to ask something. So I will stop in these junctions along the way. So old problems, new challenges. I'm going to talk about the background of Jewish-Christian relations in Israel, and I'm talking about Israel, and it's important to mention that because we have many definitions to this area, this piece of land. I could talk about the Holy Land, and then I'm talking about the very vague area that could include, according to the Franciscans, Syria and Lebanon as well. I can talk about Israel, and then I will talk about the states, the borders of the state. I can talk about the state of Israel, the land of Israel. There are many definitions related to different definitions of the land. I would use a couple of definitions along the way, but I'm talking mainly about the situation in Israel where you have Jewish population and Christian population. In other Middle Eastern countries, you don't have Jewish population. So I will talk about the challenges here within the borders of the state of Israel, or I will talk about the challenges. I would present the special challenges, and then I will talk a little bit about achievements, and we can ask at the end, what next? I don't have answers. Well, I have some answers for what next, but I'll be happy to hear also your ideas and thoughts about that. So just something about the background. When we talk about Jewish-Christian relations, I said in the Holy Land, in Israel, again, different borders, different understanding of the names and the meaning of the names. I would start by introducing something about the Jewish population and then something about the Christian population. Something about the Jewish population. So in Israel, majority of the population is Jewish. 75% of the Israelis are Jewish. And I'm not going to talk about the diversity within the Jewish society. I would bring some numbers. So 75% of the Jewish population in Israel were born in Israel. And this is very important because when we talk about experience with Christians, having any experience living with Christian, we have to remember that 75% of the Israelis have never lived in mixed society, or always lived as majority within the land. For someone who grew up in America and who was surrounded with Christians, who went to school with Christians, or even if he went to Jewish school, but he went to the grocery store with people from other religions, and he used to see that everyone is celebrating Christmas around him, and Sunday is a day off, and he has more experience with living with Christian and knowing Christian. But for Israelis, you have very little experience with Christian. You don't really know any Christian. 52% of the adult Jewish population indicated, and this is from a survey from 2009, and I would think that the changes in the last 10 years would be minor. 52% of the adult Jewish population indicated they have no Christian friends or acquaintances. So most of Israelis don't really know Christians. What do they know about Christianity and Christians? So as I said, basically what they see in television. Christmas trees, Santa Claus. There's something with Thanksgiving. A lot of Israelis are confused about that and think it's a Christian holiday. There's something about Mary. I think many Israelis know about the Pope from the 4th century, Sylvester, that his saint day is on the 31st of December. And for some reason in Israel, instead of celebrating the New Year, we celebrate Sylvester. A lot of people go to Sylvester party instead of New Year party on the eve of the 1st of January. 23% of the adult Jewish population is greatly or significantly bothered when they meet a Christian in the street who is wearing a cross. Okay, so it's not a huge percentage, but it's still something which is very normal for someone who grows up in Europe. is not obvious for someone who grows up in Israel because he doesn't used to see people wearing a cross. 58% of the adult Jewish population believes that there has been changes for the better in the attitude of Catholic Church toward Judaism and Jews in the past 50 years. And that's interesting because they wouldn't know to say what were the changes, but it seems that they have a feeling that there was a change. Probably it's connected to the late Pope John Paul II, who got very positive cover during his years of service in the Catholic Church and his visit in 2000, and now with Pope Francis. 53% of the adult Jewish population believes that there has been change for the better in the attitude of Protestant churches toward Judaism and Jews in the past 50 years. And this is interesting because a lot of Jews are aware of the Zionist Christian who perceive this very, very positive toward Jews and Judaism. But still, we're talking about a little more than half of the population. So you don't have experience with Christians. You don't know Christians. You don't know anything about Christianity. We don't learn about Christianity in schools. And if you're interested, I wrote a short article about what is written and how Christianity is described in history textbooks in Israel today. And you see that it's, you get the information, but it's very biased. What do you know about Christianity, except for Christmas tree and Santa Claus, is basically what you learn in these history books. So you get a very, very short introduction to Christianity when you learn about the Second Temple period, you learn about the first century. So toward the end, it's mentioned there. And then you learn about the Crusaders, and you learn about the expulsion from Spain, and you learn about the pogroms, and you learn about the Shoah, the Holocaust. So if you're an Israeli who grew up in Israel, don't know Christian, never met a Christian, the image you have of Christianity is that they either, and excuse me for that, either they try to convert us or try to kill us. So still, not all the Israelis think that, but you can see that that a lot of Israelis are mainly ignorant and have lack of awareness of the diversity within the Christian history and Christian communities and different attitudes. They just don't know because they're not familiar with that. So that's something to remember in the background. Now, I'm going back to the Christians in Israel, and I'll get back to the Jews when we talk about the challenges, and ask who are the Christian in Israel, because it's also very important to discuss that before we get into the question of Jewish-Christian relations. So who are the Christians in Israel? So officially in Israel, and for those of you who served in Israel, lived in Israel, you're probably familiar with that. So as I said, 75% of the population in Israel is Jewish. It's Jewish according to the Jewish Orthodox law. That means that 75% of the Israelis have a Jewish mother, and that means that they're registered by the state as Jews. And then 17% are Muslims, and then 2% are registered as Christians, sorry. 2%. So it's about 175,000 people in Israel are registered as Christians. So your religion is registered by the state, your nationality and religion. And I'm talking about Israeli citizens. So it doesn't matter what is your religion, you're an Israeli citizen. But as a citizen, your nationality and your religion is registered. If you're Jewish, you will be registered as Jewish nationality and Jewish religion. If you're a Christian Arab, you will be registered as a nationality as an Arab and a Christian in the religion. If you're Muslim, so your nationality would be Arab and your religion would be Islam. If you're Druze, it would be Druze. So we're talking about 175,000 people that in their registration within the Ministry of Interior, the religion is Christian. Among them, 80% are Arab Christians. Now, again, for those of you familiar with the Christian population in the Holy Land, it's obvious. But for many Christians who come to the Holy Land who are not familiar with the Christians in the Holy Land, it's quite surprising to discover that most of the Christians, if you go to a random church in the Galilee and you enter the church, the language of the prayer would not be Hebrew, would not be English, and would not be Latin. That's sometimes the answer I get when I ask this question. But the language of the prayer would be Arabic. Majority of the Christians here are Arab Christians. They're Arabs because their language is Arabic, because their culture is Arab, and they were Arabinized 1,300 years ago. So we're not talking about Muslims who converted to Christianity. We're not talking about Europeans who came here, but we're talking about Christians who were here since early Christianity, since the first generation, since Jesus' time. They were here the whole time. They were speaking Aramaic, they were speaking Greek, they were speaking other languages. And then in the 7th century, when the Arabs came from the Arab Peninsula and occupied all the Middle East, North Africa, all the way to Spain, the language of the new empire was Arabic. So everyone switched to Arabic since the 7th century. Jews, Christians, and of course the Muslims. And prayers were translated to Arabic, so people would be able to understand the prayers. And the Bible was translated, the Old Testament, the Tanakh, and the New Testament were translated to Arabic. So Jews and Christians would be able to understand the scriptures. And Christians and Jews, and of course Muslims, were writing in Arabic. So that was the language of the region. And since then we can talk about Arab Christians as we can talk about Arab Jews. Jews who speak Arabic, who are part of the Arab culture, can definitely be called Arab Jews. Christians who live here, who speak Arabic, who are part of the Arab culture, are Arab Christians. The Arab Christian would insist to check the text in the book of Acts when the disciple received the Holy Spirit, and the people standing around them are quite amazed in chapter 2, and they wonder how come they speak in these different languages. And there's a list of people from all over their area who were present in that scene, and they mentioned this in the list, also the Arabs. So there were Arabs here. So there were here people who were speaking Arabic, and there were probably among the first Christians already people that their mother tongue was Arabic. But you cannot talk about Arab Christians in the Holy Land before the 7th century, when it became the common language for everyone, not just for the Christians. So we're talking about Arab Christians. There was a try of Christians in the region, in the Middle East, to avoid using the title Arabs, because the Arab identity became more connected to fundamentalist Muslims, and people want to kind of separate themselves. So we hear in Egypt Coptic Christians who insist that they're not Arabs, they're Copts. They were there before the Arabs came here. They have nothing to do with the Arabs who came from the Arab Peninsula and occupied their land, Egypt. But they're Coptic, they're authentic Egyptian. You can hear that among Maronites in Lebanon. And you can also hear that, some voices like that among Christians in Israel who say, we're not Arabs, we're Aramaic. We were here before the Arabs came here. Yes, we speak Arabic because that's the language of the region, but we have nothing to do with the Arab world. This is a phenomenon that can be identified, especially after the Arab Spring or the Arab Autumn in the last 10 years. It's a phenomenon that was hugged warmly by many Israeli politicians who thought it would be an opportunity to separate the Christian Arab population from the Muslim Arab population and strengthen their relation with the Jews. It's not very successful, I have to admit, because those Christians who insist on being Aramaic Christian and not Arab Christians don't get a lot of support among the Arab Christian population in Israel. But there was a try even to allow them to change the registration, instead of being registered as Arab Christian, to be registered as Aramaic Christian. Again, not with a great success, because most of the Arab Christians insist on their identity as Arab Christians. So this is the majority of the Christians here in Israel. There are also 20%, so about 40,000 Christians who are not Arabs, and they're still Israelis registered as Christians. And I'm talking mainly about Western people who are married to Israelis, people who united with their family and they're not Jewish and they immigrated to Israel because they're married to Israelis, righteous among the nations who received Israeli citizenship, them and their families. And Armenians who are not Arabs. So there's a small community, there's a small number of people who are Christians but not Arabs, but the majority of the Christians here are Arabs. And I would mainly talk about them when I talk about Jewish-Christian relations. But I do have to mention that there are many other Christians in Israel who are not registered, who are not officially exist as Christians in Israel. Either they exist in Israel as citizens but not as Christian, or they're Christian but they're not registered in Israel. And I mention them because they definitely influence Jewish-Christian relations. There are between 30,000 to 150,000 immigrants from the former Soviet Union countries who are registered as no religion. Now, in the pie that I showed before, here, you see that there are 4% of the population in Israel who have no religious affiliation. So in Israel, you can immigrate to Israel based on the law of return if you have a Jewish mother, Jewish father, grandmother, or grandfather. But when you're registered, you cannot be registered as a Jew. If you immigrate to Israel based on the fact that your father was a Jew, you would not be able to register as a Jew by the state, because the registration of the religion is based on the Orthodox Jewish law. So there is a difference between the civil law and the religious law. You can immigrate to Israel if you have a Jewish father or grandfather, but you would not be registered as a Jew. If you do immigrate and you have a Jewish father, you can register as a Christian if you like. But a lot of people came from the former Soviet Union countries, from Russia, from Ukraine, from Belarus. They didn't want to register as Christians because in Russia they were Jewish, because they had a Jewish father and they felt Jewish, and they came to Israel because they thought they're Jewish, and they preferred to be registered with no religious affiliation. So they, in their registration, the nationality could be Russian or even the Soviet Union, and the religion would be no religion. And it's 4% of the population. It's 380,000 people. And among them, some of them, and we don't know exactly how many, came to Israel really with no religion. And when they came to Israel, they found God. They reconnected to their faith. And it was Jesus. So in Israel, for the sake of the state, they have no religion, but in their heart, there's Jesus and there's God. So these people are not registered as Christians, and no one knows exactly how many of these no religion community actually follow Christianity. Probably also some Jews, people who are registered as Jews and follow Jesus. But we're talking about few tens, if not more than 100,000 people who are practicing Christians, who are Israelis, who were integrated into the Jewish Hebrew-speaking society, who serve in the army, who go to Jewish Hebrew schools, but they believe in Jesus. And they go on Saturday afternoon or on Sunday morning to the church, and they celebrate Easter, maybe along with other Jewish holidays, but they're definitely believers. We have 70 to 80,000 migrant workers from the Philippines, from South India, from Sri Lanka, from Eastern Europe, who are practicing Christians. And they're also integrated into the Jewish Hebrew-speaking society in Israel because they work with them. They work with Jewish families. Many of the Philippines or the Indians are take care of elderly people in their houses. So they live in Jewish houses. They're migrant workers, so they're temporary here, but they're Christians, and they have to pray somewhere because Saturdays and Sundays are the day when they get together and bond together, and they get together in the churches. So they had to organize themselves churches where they can meet on Saturdays and Sundays. And usually they do that in Tel Aviv, so they had to arrange new places to get together because the small churches that already exist in Jaffa are too small to host them all. And they have very, very vibrant and lively communities in Tel Aviv and other parts of the country. And again, they're migrant workers, they're not citizens, they're temporary here, but they're integrated into the Israeli Hebrew-speaking Jewish society. And they also have children, and when they get children, when women give birth to children here, the children don't get any status here. They don't have any official legal status here, but they stay here. And when they get to the age of 3, they can be admitted into a public school, public kindergarten, and the state has to give free education to every child from the age of 3 to the age of 18. So these kids who were born to migrant workers from the Philippines or from India or from other places, go to Hebrew-speaking schools because that's what they have next to their home. They don't live in Arab villages or town, but they usually live next to the place where their parents are working, and the parents are working with Jewish families. So they go to Hebrew-speaking school where they get Jewish education, even if it's not a very religious education, but they get very Jewish education. So they celebrate all the Jewish holidays, and they celebrate Hanukkah and Purim and Pesach. But then they also go on Saturday to the church where they get Sunday school education on Saturday about their own faith, the Catholic faith. So here you see the kids from the Filipino catechism class, where they do the catechism in what language? Yes, in Hebrew. So they do the catechism, they learn about their own faith in Hebrew. And actually the Hebrew-speaking Catholic community had to produce booklets and material and educational material in Hebrew for children, something they never had before because they never had children, so many children in the community, but they had to produce it in Hebrew so they would be able to teach them about their own faith in Hebrew, because that's the mother tongue, that's the language they use. And they have to organize camp for them during the Jewish holidays, because the Jews are at home with their parents, but these kids are, have nothing to do during the long Passover vacation or the long Hanukkah vacation. So they have camps, and these are quite religious camps. For those of you familiar, I can compare it only to Jewish religious camps, but to Chabad camp, the Lubavitchers, they also do something similar for Jewish kids. So it's a camp, but then you have prayer in the morning and prayer in the evening and religious classes, and then in between you have some fun. But that's the kind of programs that these kids have. So they're also part of, so when we talk about Christians in the Holy Land, they're also part of the Christians in the Holy Land. And these kids go to Hebrew schools. And when I teach Christianity in colleges where we train teachers, and these teachers are trained to be teachers in Hebrew-speaking public schools, I tell them that they have to be prepared that they're not going to have Christians in their class, because these Filipino kids are go to Hebrew-speaking class. And these are, and they're Christians. And we also have people from Africa, Eritrean, 27,000 Eritreans live in Israel. They're young, they're now raising families. These kids are also going to the Israeli Hebrew-speaking public education. They also grow up into this very complicated identity of being Christians, children to parents who have no idea what's going to be their future and for how long they're going to be able to stay in Israel, speaking Hebrew as their mother tongue, and different languages with their parents, depend on the parent, and kind of being in between the Jewish Israeli society and the Christian migrant worker or asylum seeker society. And just to give you an example of this complexity, and I think this is one of the most amazing stories I always like to tell. So in 2016, there was the International Catholic Youth Day in Poland. So every, I think, second year, there's a youth day, Catholic Youth Day, and youth, millions of youth come from all over the world for a big gathering in one of the countries, and they have mass with the Pope. So in 2016, it was in Poland, and the delegation from the Hebrew-speaking Catholic community went there. And it was very surprising, and they had all kind of funny stories, because they went around with the Israeli flag, because these kids, the only state that can be identified with is Israel. These Filipino kids that you see over here, or Eritrean kids, they don't know any other country but Israel. They were born here, they grew up here, they went to Hebrew school. Some of them would even volunteer to the army. So that's the only country they know, and the only flag that can be identified with is the Israeli flag. So you see a group of people holding the Israeli flag in a gathering of Catholics. Now in Poland, so the Poles, they used to see Israeli groups with Israeli flags, but in a very different context. And then when they had this huge gathering for the Mass, this Israeli delegation discovered that they arranged it according to the geography, to the region. So they were sitting next to the Lebanese, Iraqi, Egyptian, Syrian Christians and Palestinians. And there were some tensions because they were holding the Israeli flag, and all these Christians from the Arab surrounding countries were around them. So it's a very challenging position to find yourself. I mean, who are you, and how, in what way this flag represent you, and in what were you Catholic, what were you Israeli? So it's a very interesting community and very interesting reality that we have now in Israel that we didn't have before, when we didn't have the migrant worker and the asylum seekers and the Russians. So we're talking about many more than just the 2% Christian that I've mentioned in the beginning. So officially there are 175,000 Christians, but if I really want to count the number of Christians who actually live in Israel, we're talking more about 400,000 Christians. And of course, the fact that there are more Christians that are integrated into the Hebrew-speaking Jewish society, it influenced more the attitude of the Israeli Jews toward Christians and Christianity. Because with the Arab Christian, we don't have a lot of interaction. And I will get to that toward the end. In order to create encounters between Arab Christians and Israeli Jews, and Arab Christians, Israelis, and Jewish Israelis, you have to create a project, you have to create an opportunity to meet. It's not necessarily something that happened on a daily basis. But because Arab lives usually in Arab villages, or even in mixed cities and towns, you have Arab neighborhoods and Jewish neighborhoods. People tend to live among people that's similar to them. We have the language barrier. We will talk about that. Arab Christians speak Arabic as mother tongue, Jews speak Hebrew. We have different schools. We have Arab speaking schools and we have Hebrew speaking schools. So you don't have many opportunities to meet an Arab Christian and talk about identity and religion. But with these Christians that I mentioned, with these Christians from the former Soviet Union countries, with the children of the migrant workers, you have more opportunities to meet them because they are integrated into the Hebrew-speaking Jewish society. So I think it's definitely influenced the attitude of Jews toward Christian and Christianity. But I would like to go back to the Arab Christian and present the challenges over there. And you will see that it's still very complicated with all the changes that happen with these new Christians that are integrated into the Israeli Jewish Hebrew-speaking society. Still, there are unique challenges to Jewish-Christian relations. So I want to get to the challenges. And first of all, we have to ask, who is the minority and who is the majority? Now, when you have dialogue between two groups, usually there's one group that is more dominant than the other. And there's a certain expectation of the minority group that the majority would be interested in them, would listen to them, would care about them. If they invited them for a dialogue, they probably want to care about their rights, about their future. And if you just look at the example of interfaith dialogue in other countries around the world, Jewish-Christian dialogue in other countries around the world, in the US, for example, it's usually the Christians, the majority, the Jews, the minority. It's usually the Christians who are interested in Judaism, in Jewish life, in Jewish scriptures, in Jewish history. Christians are interested also in their roots that are in the Jewish history and culture and faith. And Jews are less interested in Christianity and more interested to present themselves. And in a way, there's something, and especially when Jewish-Christian dialogue started back after, in the 50s, it was Jews who felt that if the Christian would know us, our place in the society would be safer and stable. We also have to admit that Jewish-Christian dialogue in the West, in Europe and in the US, was mainly academic or intellectuals or religious leaders. You would see, professors and people, and rabbis, not a grassroots level, but still the balance, the power, the relation between the different powers was quite clear. The Christian, the majority, the Jewish, the minority, they expect sympathy from the majority. They expect the majority to take care of them, to make sure that their rights would be taken care of, that their rights would be preserved. And they expected them to have interest in Judaism. It's true for the US. I think it's very true for Europe. Here it is different, because here, if you check the numbers, 75% are Jews. So if we have a dialogue between Christian and Jews here, it's obvious that the Jews are the majority and the Christians a minority. And if the Christians are minority, when they come to the dialogue, when they come to have encounter with Jews, and it could be a casual or formal encounter, they expect that the Jews would listen to them, they would have interest in them, and they would take care about their rights and about their future and about their stability in the land. The problem is that it's not clear here who is the minority and who is the majority and who's supposed to take care of whom. Because we as Israeli Jews, we don't feel majority. We still, our self-perception is that we're still a minority. We're a minority of Jews in the Middle East. We're a minority of Jews in the Christian world. So we're still a minority. We still have to protect ourselves. And we expect the Christian to understand that. And the Christians here in the Holy Land, they're a double majority. They're part of the Arab world and they're part of the Christian world. So they're very strong and powerful. They have to listen to us. They have to hear us. We used to be the one who are overprotective. We protect our identity. We protect our people. We protect ourselves. So you, Christian, have to listen to us. You have to hear about our pain. You have to hear about our past. You have to hear about our Holocaust. And you're the majority. And of course, the Christians here, they feel a minority. They are a minority within a minority. The minority of Christians among the Muslims and minority of Arabs within the Jewish state. So when they come to the dialogue, they expect the Jews to listen to them, and they do not expect that the Jews would ask them to listen and hear about Judaism. So there's kind of a lack of understanding of the role of each side in the dialogue, and it's very hard to build the confidence, to build the relationship when both sides expect the other to be the first to listen. Both sides expect that the other would take care of them, the other would listen to them, the other would sympathize with their pain, with their suffering, with their difficulties. And that's what makes it very hard to even to counter the dialogue when you don't know who is the minority and who is the majority. I stop here because I said I will stop in the middle for questions, and I see a couple of questions in the chat. So before I continue, if there's any questions before I continue, if someone wants to open the microphone quickly or just write something.
Well, I'm just noticing, and I guess some of it has to do with definitions, the drastic difference between the number of religiously unaligned in Israel and in the United States. You're saying there are 4% that are not affiliated. The latest figures in this country is that there are 26% of the people in this country who consider themselves unaffiliated.
It's not a matter of how it's not a matter of how you define yourself. It's how the state register you. It's not the same thing. In America, your religion is not registered at all. So the state doesn't care about your faith. It's just, surveys. But it's not the concern of the state if you're Christian, Jewish, and if you're not affiliated at all. Here in Israel, your religion has nothing to do with your faith or your belief in God or if you're practicing or not. It's something that is registered by the state. So if you're born to a Jewish mother, automatically you're registered as a Jew. And if you immigrated based on the law of return and you don't have a Jewish mother, you're registered with no affiliation. It has nothing to do with your faith. You could be a practicing Christian, but you're still registered with no religion. I actually know a Russian priest who came to Israel because his mother was married to a Jew, but his biological father was an Orthodox priest, and he came with his mother and her Jewish partner. So he has no Jewish connection. He wasn't registered as a Christian because his mother brought him as a child, and she registered herself with no religion. But he's a parish priest. So this, for the state, he has no religion, but of course he's a practicing Christian. So it has nothing to do with your faith or your self-definition. I can define myself as atheist and having no nationality, no religion, but for the state, I'm Jewish. And the practical meaning of that would be the question of marriage, divorce, and burial. So you have to get married. In Israel, we don't have civil marriage. So if you want to get married in Israel, it has to be done through one of the religious authorities. And if you're registered with no religion, for example, you cannot get married in Israel. You can live together and have all the rights as a couple, but you're not registered according to the state, unless you're registered somewhere else in another country. So it's not a matter of faith or your self-definition as it would be in the US, but it's a matter of registration by the state. So 4% of the people in Israel, for example, cannot get married in Israel because this service does not exist in Israel for them because we don't have civil marriage and they're not affiliated to any of the religious communities. Again, you can be an atheist Christian and not being even baptized, but because you were born to a Christian parents, you're registered by the state as a Christian, and the same. Now you can change registration. Of course, we have freedom of conscience, so you can convert and change the registration. Of course, the state is a bit reluctant, especially if you convert from Judaism to another religion. But there's a department in the Ministry of Justice who is responsible for conversion, and then you can change that. It's interesting because I talk a lot about it with people from the former Soviet Union countries who are now in this kind of in between, not registered as Christian, but living a very Christian life. And many of them would not, even if they were baptized in the church, they would not change their registration because they're afraid, because they know that they came here based on the fact that they have Jewish roots, and they're afraid that they would have problems if they would change the registration to Christian, which is interesting because officially, if you're an Israeli citizen, you're free to change to whatever religion you want. But this fear is always there. There was another question about the registration that I've just noticed. Yeah, so now there's a yes, you can. There was an appeal to a court, to the Supreme Court, of people who wanted to change the religion to no religion, or to change even the nationality. Now there was an article in Haaretz about Avram Burger want to change that. So it's possible. The court decided that the state has to allow people to change their registration. But again, most of the people just ignore it because unless you have to get married, get divorced, it's not a problem. It might be a social problem. Maybe you would not be socially accepted if you're not Jewish and you want to get married into get romantically involved with the more traditional family, but it's not an issue unless you come to the question of marriage, divorce, and burial. Yeah, question.
I have a question. Can you address the notion, the so-called Messianic Jews? We're talking about people who follow Jesus, believe in Jesus, speak Hebrew, and are Israelis. And I mean, the Messianic, so-called Messianic Jews, they believe that they're Jews, but they believe in Jesus. And
right.
Did you mention them, and are they counted?
No.
What you mentioned?
No, I haven't mentioned them because most of them are registered as Jews, and they would see themselves as Jews. So it's a bit the attitude toward the Messianic Jews in Israel is a bit sensitive. They would see themselves as Jews. Most of them are registered as Jews because they have a Jewish mother. Maybe they're a mixed family, so maybe one of the partners is not Jewish according to the Jewish law, the religious law, and he's registered with another religion. But usually one partner in the family would be Jewish. So many of them are registered as Jews. They would insist on their Jewish identity. They're integrated into, of course, the Hebrew-speaking society. And they said that their Christian faith, the faith in Jesus, doesn't contradict their Jewish identity, being part of the Jewish people, being part of the Jewish culture, being even, some of them are practicing Jews, some of them are more non-practicing, or what we call in Hebrew, chiloni, secular Jews, but they don't see contradiction between their Jewish identity and their faith in Jesus. I don't relate to them because I think it's a bit more sensitive issue, since some of them, and as I said, since we have, and I will get to that in a second, since we have this very old fear that all the Christians try to convert us or kill us from the past, and I'm a bit cynical here, but in the background it's there, the fear. And since some of these Messianic Jews are involved in proselytizing and missionary work, they have a very bad reputation among Israeli Jews. And when the law was changed in Israel that if a Jew converted to another religion, someone who has a Jewish mother converted to another religion and wants to immigrate to Israel based on the law of return, he would not be able to receive the citizenship. If he's not Jewish at all, but have a Jewish father, according to the civil law, it's fine. But if he has a Jewish mother and he converted to Christianity, for example, he would not be able to receive citizenship. And there was a big question about Messianic Jews. If someone has a Jewish mother and he's a Messianic Jew and he wants to immigrate to Israel based on the law of return that allows every Jew to return to his homeland and get citizenship, would that be considered a convert or someone who affiliates to another religion or not? And the Supreme Court decided that it is considered to be another religion, and therefore Messianic Jews who want to immigrate based on the law of return and have a Jewish mother would not receive the citizenship based on that law. And that means that the civil law recognized the general tendency, and that's the words of the judge in that case, the general tendency to see the Messianic Jews as Christians, although they themselves see themselves as Jews who believe in Jesus and nothing more than that. Okay, I want to continue because I want to get to the other challenges, not just the balance between powers, but also to talk about other aspects that are not less problematic. The past. And I've hinted to that, but it's very important when we talk about Jewish-Christian relations. Jewish-Christian relations in the past, Jewish-Christian have very difficult history. It starts with day one, with the first community of Jews who believed that Jesus is the Messiah and were expelled from the synagogues. And we read in the book of Acts how Paul was trying to kick them out of the synagogues. And we hear the story of St. Stephen, who was stoned by the Jews. And we know that there are prayers that were made by Jews in order to push these believers outside of the synagogues. And the Christians, in a very early stage, were writing horrible things about Jews. And Justine Martyr was writing horrible things about Jews. And George Chrysostomos in the 4th century tried to frighten these Christians who still went to synagogues because they felt connected, because they were curious, and said, don't go to this theater. These are not serious places. This is not a house of worship. It seems that the separation between these two communities took a long time, and it was very painful because we're holding the same script.
No sound.
Looks like we lost Hana. Let's just wait and see what happens. Hopefully she'll come back.
Sorry. I
She's
something
already
with
back.
the internet.
Okay, happy to have you back.
No, I'm okay. I'm back. I don't know what happened.
You were speaking about kicking out.
Yeah, no, I remember I was.
You were
I
kicked
just
out.
to the internet. That's scary. After a year, almost a year living my life through Zoom, if the internet would collapse now, that would be. So that the relationship is so problematic since we're sharing the same text and we having different understanding of the scripture, and that led to tension between Jews and Christians from the first day. And in order to keep the separation, in order to keep the distance, Jews and Christians had to build a wall of hatred between them from both sides of the community. So Jews and Christians lived next to each other, but they built a wall of hatred and animosity. And we came from Europe. We came to Israel with these memories. And as I said, what do we know about the history of Jews and Christians living together? What we learned in history book. And what did we learn from the history book? The highlights of Jewish history. And what are the highlights of Jewish history? Persecution, expulsion, Holocaust. So what do we know about Christianity? As I said before, they try to kill us or convert us. We don't learn about this 2,000 years where Christian and Jews lived next to each other and they were neighbors. And when a woman needed a cup of sugar, she went to her neighbor and got a cup of sugar from her, and they exchanged recipes and they worked together. You don't get to hear about that. You get to hear about the highlights, and the highlights, yes, there are very problematic issues between Christian and Jews. So with these memories, we came to Israel to meet Christians or to talk about Christians and to learn about Christianity. And it's an issue. And when Christian and Jews meet in Europe, in Germany, the Christian in Germany understand that. And they understand that we have a problem with Christianity and we have a problem with the history. And the cross symbolizes the history of Jewish-Christian relations. But when we come to meet local Christians, they don't understand what should be their connection to what happened to us Jews in Europe. Why do we have to keep mentioning the persecution of Christians? Why do we keep mentioning the Crusaders and what they did to the Jewish community in the Rhineland? Because the Christians here were suffering from the Crusaders the same way that the Jews suffered from them. And they were happy when Saladin freed them, released them from the Crusaders, from the Catholic occupation. So for the Christians here, they don't understand the relevancy of the Christian-Jewish relations in Europe to the Jewish-Christian relations here. They don't understand why they have to hear about the Holocaust all the time. They don't understand why they have to hear about what the Christian did to Jews in Europe when they here lived as a minority and tried to survive as a minority here through all these years. And the past relation really influenced the present relation, because for us as Jews, it's really hard to ignore what happened in Europe and talk about with the Christians here as different Christians. So it's something that is always in the background, the past relations. But there are also some theological questions that we don't have with Islam. And again, a couple of examples from the survey. In 2009, 66% of the secular Jews disagreed with the statement that Christianity is a religion of idolatry. Now, for those of you familiar with Jewish halakha, to say about religion that it's idolatry, it's like the worst you can say. You can say a lot of things about other religions that are not very complimenting, but idolatry is like the worst. And I'm not getting into the question if Christianity is idolatry and who said that and why did he say that. I'm just saying that for many secular Jews who don't know much about idolatry, Jewish law, Jewish history, but for them, 66% say that it's not religious of idolatry. But what about the other 34? 78% of the religious people said that Christianity is a religion of idolatry. So maybe among the secular Jews, about a third of them think that it's religion of idolatry, but almost 80% of the religious do think that it's religion of idolatry. Now, again, I'm not getting into the definition of what is idolatry, because most of the people don't really know what exactly in the Bible, what the meaning of idolatry. But just saying that is like saying the worst thing you can about the other religion. So people just say that even without understanding the consequences and what does it mean. So I'm talking about theological aspect. I'm now not talking about the history. And the interesting aspect of another interesting point in the survey was that we found out that as younger the people are, the more negative their attitude is, because 52% of young people agree that Christianity is religion of idolatry. And if you compare it to older ages, you see that less percentage were saying that Christianity is religion of idolatry. So there was something that went all along the survey, that the younger people have more negative attitude toward Christianity. Again, probably because they have less exposure, less understanding, more ignorance about it, and not familiar with that. Now, another interesting point is that 44% think that we need to be taught about Christianity, but only 37% think that New Testament should be taught. And there's a difference between teaching Christianity and teaching about Christianity and reading the text. There's something more threatening about reading the text. And one of the things that I do with my students, when I said, when you want to teach something about the New Testament, what kind of text do you bring? And we make a whole list from the less threatening to the most threatening, what do you bring to class? So to bring the Old Testament and New Testament together would be the most threatening for the students, but to bring just a quote on the presentation, PowerPoint presentation, would be less threatening. And we talked about it. To which class do you bring which tool, which text, or how do you present a text in each class? Because there's something about the text, about the scripture, which is more threatening. Again, the percentage among young people, the negative attitudes among young people are higher than in the older generations. So we have a problem with Christianity. And for those of you who are involved in Jewish-Christian dialogue, yes, there's a problem. There are theological problems between Jews and Christians. From the Jewish side, it's Trinity. I always say that even Christians have difficulty understanding Trinity, but it's just part of your understanding of God. But Jews always interpreted that in strange ways because we don't understand that. There's a problem with the statues, with the icons that perceives as idolatry. So a lot of Jews, even if they don't know much about Jewish law or Christianity, whenever they see that, just mentioning Trinity, just mentioning statues or icon, it sounds really, really bad to them. So this is one problem. But I want to also present the problem from the other side, from the Christian side, because they also have a theological problem when it comes to dialogue with Jews. And their problem with their theological problem with Jews would be just relating to the Bible. And that's, those of you familiar with the Christian communities are probably familiar with the theologists who write about these challenges of reading the Bible in the land of the Bible. When you read about the promised land, when you read about the chosen people, and now you know that promised land is your land that was taken by the Israelis, or you read about the chosen people, and the chosen people are the Israelis or the soldiers who stand in a checkpoint. It's challenging. How do you relate to your own Bible? How do you read your Bible? You cannot just erase the name Israel from the Bible. You cannot do that. You cannot change the Bible. But you have to find a way to read the Bible, to read the prophecies in a ways that would give a place for you as a minority in the Jewish state. And the implementation of these challenges is, on one hand, we have, from the Jewish side, we have cases of tag b'chir, price tag, of attacks over Christian sites for religious reasons. It's not political. It has nothing to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I will get to that as well. But it's just anti-Christian attacks. It's very rare, but it happens. And it happens, and it's done by Jews who feel that they don't want, who feel that threatened by the fact that they're Christians and churches in Israel. And so that's an implementation or a reflection of the theological challenges. And from the Palestinian side, we see the theologists who write about that. But you can also see in a more grassroots level, you can see sometimes around Christmas time or around Easter time, you see cartoons that reflect this tension between the Bible, the Old Testament especially, and the place of the Jews in the Tanakh, and the reality and the conflict. And that's something that touches every Palestinian. I mean, if you write a beautiful text and explain the theological the new theological perspective of how to read prophecy of Isaiah, well, most of the Palestinian Christian would not read that. But if you make a cartoon like that, when you see the Holy Family going to Bethlehem and being stopped at the checkpoint, you made your point. And that, again, reflect the difficulty of addressing your scriptures in the new reality. And I come to the next thing, and that's the conflict. The conflict is present in the Jewish-Christian relation in a very, very dominant way. You cannot have Jewish-Christian dialogue without talking about the conflict. Actually, you don't have Jewish-Christian dialogue here. You always have Jewish, Israeli, Christian, Palestinian. Of course, it could be also Palestinian from Israel. It could be also Palestinian who is an Israeli citizen. But you cannot have just a dialogue between the two religions. It's always a dialogue between the two people. And you cannot invite Christian to dialogue and say, let's open the Bible and read something together there. It just doesn't happen, because it's the discussion would always go to the political situation, and would interpret it in light of the political conflict. And again, I bring an example that, again, once in a while, again, it gets to the headlines, calling Jesus Palestinian. Jesus was a Palestinian, Jesus is Palestinian, and some Jews would insist, no, but Jesus was not a Palestinian, because the province of Palestine was established 100 years after he was crucified. And of course, Jesus was also not a blonde with blue eyes and pale skin, but that's how most of the people around the world imagine him, because the way you portray him is very political. It's connected to your identity. And the fact that for Palestinians, it's important to say that Jesus was a Palestinian, it has nothing to do with the historical fact that only 100 years later, the province of Palestine was established. And again, I also ignore the academic discussion about how do you call this area, this region, in the time of the Roman, because also historians used the name Palestine even before the province was established. But calling Jesus Palestinian is actually saying, Jesus is me. I want to identify with Jesus, therefore Jesus was Palestinian. As people in the West wanted to say, Jesus is me, and therefore he has pale skin, blue eyes, and blonde hair. And that's exactly why African Americans now, or people in Africa, would talk about Black Jesus and say, it doesn't matter what exactly was the complexion of his skin. He is me, and therefore he is what I am. And if he was suffering and I'm suffering, so he was just like me, Palestinian. So again, we cannot talk about historical Jesus. We cannot talk about Jesus being a Jew, because the fact that Jews keep mentioning that Jesus was a Jew and how great, because he actually was one of us, is not helpful for the dialogue. Is actually adding more salt to the already painful wound. How do you deal with the fact that Jesus was a Jew, just like the soldier in the checkpoint, or just like the politician who make decision that makes your life horrible, or just like these people who voted for the nation state law? It's impossible for you to really sit together and say, wow, yes, he actually was a Jew, and great, we have a lot in common. It's much easier for you as a Palestinian Christian to say Jesus was a Palestinian, and even, and it happens, ignore the fact that he was Jewish, and not talk about it because it's so painful. So politics, religion, the conflict is very much part of the dialogue here. So when we try to do resonance scriptures, sit together and read scriptures together, it's really hard to ignore the political situation around us when we read the scriptures together, because everything is loaded with the political situation. And just the last challenge I would like to relate to, and then I'll get to the achievement, is the fact that we don't speak the same language. So with a Palestinian Christian in Israel, and again, I'm talking about Israel and about the state of Israel, we don't speak the same language. Christians speak Arabic, Arab Christians speak Arabic, Jews speak Hebrew. That's true. Most of the Arab Christians speak Hebrew, even very good Hebrew, but they don't speak about religion in Hebrew. When they go to church, they speak in Arabic. They know all the terminology that related to their faith in Arabic. They never talked about faith, about scriptures in Hebrew. So even if they're perfect in Hebrew and they work with Israelis and their Hebrew is fluent, when it comes to talk about faith and about religion, they lack the words. And that's the case when they know Hebrew, but many of them don't speak very good Hebrew. And then you have to use translation, and translation is also interpretation. So the dialogue is very lame. Okay, so it sounds very pessimistic, and I would like to conclude and open the discussion. And talk about achievements. So a lot is being done, and a lot is being done by the Rossing Center, but many other organizations as well. Of course, we're not the only one. We're the only one who specialize in Jewish-Christian relations, but there are many other interfaith organizations, a lot of organizations who touch in one way or the other in interfaith. So I'll just mention a couple of things that we're doing. So we work on knowledge. We believe that in education, if you educate about the other, you feel more confident to meet him, to talk to him, you're not so threatened. So if couple of examples of, I just bring people to meet with head of the churches, doing conferences, teaching. So I teach in colleges for teachers. I train teachers how to talk about Christianity and change their attitudes toward Christianity. So when they get to talk about it in history class or in other opportunities, they would have, even if they don't have all the knowledge and they're not going to be expert in Christianity, but they would have a positive attitude when they talk about Christianity. So education, training tour guides. In the group down in the picture on the right, where you see this religious Orthodox young man with a Franciscan monk, it's a yeshiva from the Gush, from Rabbi Riskin.
Efrat.
Mazeh?
Efrat.
From Efrat. I forgot the name of the yeshiva. But anyway, they train rabbis, and they asked me to give a couple of classes about Christianity, and then I want to have a tour. And they wanted to meet some monks. So when we organized the meeting in the Franciscan monastery with Father Alberto, who speaks fluent Hebrew and knows how to talk to Israeli Jews, and he does his job very good. They only asked, of course, not to go into churches, but also not to sit in a room with a cross. And again, if I would say that to a Palestinian Christian, he would be very insulted and he wouldn't be ready to meet with the group, because what do you mean? Why do you have a problem with the cross? The cross is a symbol of my faith. Why do you have a problem with that? Why can't you sit in a room where there's a cross? But Father Alberto is Italian, and he's familiar with the Israelis and the Jews, and he understands the sensitivities. And he was looking for a room, and he spent a week looking for a room in the monastery where there is no cross. And at the end, he found one of the meeting groups where you can take the cross from the wall and put it in a drawer. So that's what we did, and we met over there. And there was a very interesting interaction with him, because usually when I bring Israeli groups to meet with a clergy, they usually ask, so what do you do in the morning? How your day looks like? Do you miss home? How often do you see your parents? But they had totally different questions. And they discussed, for example, the question of how can you keep your concentration when you pray few times a day? I mean, how do you keep yourself, in the mood of prayers? How do you find, how don't you find, lose your concentration and think about other things while you're praying? And that's a kind of question that religious people ask other religious people from other religions. So it was very interesting discussion. But again, it was after a week of looking for a room without a cross in the Franciscan monastery. We also do a lot of encounter groups and encounter programs, and we work with children, with schools. So we get together schools where the teachers work in teams where they facilitate the meetings for the kids. So the kids get together, they spend a whole day in the Arab school. The teacher facilitates the meeting. They talk about religion, they talk about culture, they talk about the daily life. We're talking about young kids. As you see, around Christmas time, the Jewish kids go to the Christian schools and they get to see the Christian decoration, their Christmas decoration, and they get some sweets from Santa Claus. They go and visit a synagogue, they visit a mosque, they visit a church together. So they have opportunity to experience this a day together, and not just learning about the other, but just seeing the other when he goes to, for the breaks, when he goes to how he behaved in the synagogue, how he behaved with his classmates. So it's something kind of normal when they get together and spend a whole day together. So most of our work is educational work and encounter. I would also say that there's also a try to write documents, and I'll mention this document. It took Jewish Israeli rabbis a lot of time to produce a document in reaction to Nostra Aetate. Nostra Aetate is a document that was published by the Catholic Church in 1965 and changes the whole attitude of the Catholic Church toward Jews. And in 2000, a document was published by a group of American and European rabbis who was kind of a reaction to Nostra Aetate, but it didn't get a lot of attention in Israel. And this document that was published toward the 50th anniversary of Nostra Aetate got much more attention. It was written and signed also by Israeli rabbis. It basically says, yes, it's time to change the attitude. Let's work together. We have common motivation, common mission. We want to make this world a better world. We want to do tikkun olam. So let's work together on that because we believe that we're all created by God. And, without hiding or ignoring the differences between the religions. Again, not every Israeli Jew read the document, but the fact that this document exists shows that there is kind of a first step toward different kind of dialogue between Jewish religious leaders and the Christian world. There's still a lot to be done. People ask me, do you see any changes? Do you see any improvement after, working for 15 years? And I said, there's a lot of curiosity. And I think many more Israelis are curious to learn about Christianity and open to learn about Christianity. And they come to tours and courses. And we get a lot of requests from the army, from pre-military program, post-military program, young adults program. From many places, they want to learn. People are curious to learn, but there's a long way in changing the attitude. So even someone who is curious to learn, he comes with a lot of prejudice to hear about Christianity. He comes not just with ignorance, but with his fear. And this is something that we have to strengthen. This, not just to be curious and to learn about the other, but also to be able to open yourself and not to be afraid of the other, but to see how, yes, we have very difficult past, but to see how we can build the future and walk together toward the future. I will stop here, and I see there's some questions in the chat, and I want to open the discussion and to hear if you agree or do not agree. And some of you have more experience in Jewish-Christian relations, and some have more experience in Jewish-Christian relations in the Holy Land. So I would be happy to hear your comment. I will something about religious differences in Palestinian areas and connection to Israel. Sheldon, can you explain? I'm not sure I understand your question. Price tag is, I'll just answer the next question. And then price tag is a name given to some anti-Palestinian or Christian acts done as kind of reaction to terrorist attack by fundamentalist Jews who said, who attack either Palestinians or non-Jewish institution. And they use this term. It's a price tag. I mean, you did something, that's a price tag for what you did. And there's, so in Hebrew, it's Tag Mechir, and there's an organization called Tag Meir, which is, what's the name in English? What is light?
A mist.
How do they translate it to English?
Green mist.
There?
I don't know what translates to English.
Okay. But anyway, it's kind of bringing light. It's working on the same name, and they try to react to this kind of price tag action. So if there's attack on Palestinians somewhere, they would go there and present solidarity and so kind of reaction to the price tag. So that's how it's called here. So Sheldon, would you like to repeat your question, because I'm not sure I understand it?
Well, my understanding is that your talk is about what goes on in the defined boundary of Israel, the percentages.
Okay.
But I would be surprised if there aren't interconnections with compatriots in the what we call the territories or Palestine.
Territories.
And how does that color things if there are those connections? So
the Palestinian in the West Bank, in the territories, have very little connection to Jews. Many of them. In the past, it was different. In the past, many of them had more connection. And again, when I'm talking about the Christians, it's more difficult. So obviously, they don't even have this very basic encounter that we can create here. There's a problem of neutralization, so they don't want to do any official activity with Israeli organizations, so it wouldn't consider like they kind of accept this reality of occupation. So there's always the fear to work with Jews and to have interaction with Jews. But you find curiosity, and I would say not when it comes to encounter with me, but for example, in Bethlehem University, there's a training course for tour guides, where they're trained to become tour guides in the West Bank. And they have to have some classes about Judaism. And the teacher who teaches Judaism in these courses is a sister of Zion, so Catholic sister. It was Sister Anne, now it's Sister Kasha. And they said that these young Palestinian, many of them are Christian, they're very curious about Judaism. And they're very curious about Jewish life in Israel today. But the conflict is kind of overshadow and color everything. So from there, again, I'm talking about the grassroots level. I'm not talking about the theologists who write about it, but the common people, they also have curiosity, but they have a lot, it's a lot of ignorance and misunderstanding. And of course, they see Judaism as part of the conflict and not as another religion, or they cannot see that even in the light of Nostra Aetate, it's hard for them to see that because it's always connected to the fact that they see Judaism only through the lenses of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So it's even worse.
And perhaps I can add something there.
Yeah.
It could be that Roots is the only organization that conducts Jewish-Christian dialogue between local Israelis, Jews, and local Palestinians in the West Bank. For the past 6 years, we've had a small group of Jewish Israeli leaders meeting with Palestinian Christian religious leaders. I can't reveal the names of the people involved. It's obviously very, very sensitive. But this group has been meeting for 6 years, and I think we have made tremendous, tremendous strides in understanding each other, both on the religious level and on the political level. The truth is that I try not to keep politics out of it. I try to find the opportunities to use religion to begin to talk about politics, because that's what is really important today, is the political situation between Palestinians and Jews, whether the Palestinians are Muslim or Christian. We are hoping someday that we'll be able to make our group public and people will be able to speak out. But even when we're not public, both the Israeli Jews and the Palestinian Christians are definitely telling their students about what they're learning, not just on the intellectual level, but on the emotional and identity level. So hopefully we're having at least a little bit of an impact.
I would like, of course, you're welcome to open. I just want to relate to a question of David, and then you're really welcome to open the microphone and ask a question about, there was a question from David about Zionist Christians, about evangelical Christians who are very supportive of Israel. I think this is one of the major challenges for the Christians, for the Palestinian Christians in Israel and in the West Bank, because they feel betrayed by Christians who are brothers and sisters in faith, but actually very supportive of Israel, and not just of Israel, but the settlements. And they follow the Bible. These evangelical Christians follow the Bible, and they look at the promised land as it was promised only to the Jews, and therefore the Palestinians have no place there. And these Palestinian Christians said, well, we read the same Bible, and you ignore our presence here in the Holy Land, and you only put all your emphasis on the Jews and strength the Jewish presence here. So there's a lot of tension and difficulties for the Palestinian Christian with this evangelical Christian. From the Israeli side, again, we have ambivalency because Israel is a state, and many Israelis, and including Israeli Jews, who would say horrible thing about Catholic and Orthodox, would say that no, the evangelicals, they are different. And they would find ways to justify accepting evangelical Christians because of their political views. I think everyone has to make his decisions and priorities, and if they allow themselves to ignore the fact that these evangelical Christians still believe in Jesus and still think that there's no way to get to heaven without Jesus, and these rabbis are ready to ignore that and said, okay, we ignore that, but we accept them and say, oh, and this is different kind of Christianity, it's nothing like idolatry and it's fine. Great, enjoy the money, enjoy the political support. But I think it's just, closing one eye in order to get the political support you need. We work with Palestinian Christian in Israel and in the West Bank, and for us, it's very important. It's very important to clarify to them that we are with them, and therefore, of course, we're happy to meet evangelical Christians, and we have to explain them about Jewish-Christian relations and challenges and the local Christian communities. But we would be supportive of the local Christian. We think about the future of the Christians here, and I think it's very important for us that the Christians would stay here and be part of the land and the people and the state in Israel, and therefore we want to support them. So we have very clear opinion about that. But of course, yes, a lot of Jews religious Jews who enjoy the support of this evangelical Christian ignore their understanding of what's going to happen toward the end of the days. There were other questions.
Can I ask a question that's not directly related? Is it true that in the West Bank now the government is going to offer the coronavirus vaccine to the settlers, but not to the Palestinians?
Israel, the state? Israel is first.
We've got things in the newspaper. Israel's bragging about how many people they vaccinated, but they're also saying it's not being provided to the Palestinians.
So Israel provides vaccination to the Israeli citizens. Palestinians in the West Bank are not Israeli citizens, and therefore it's a different question. So first, Israel provides the vaccination. Now, you're absolutely right that now there is a whole debate from practical perspective, not just moral perspective, that we need to make sure that the Palestinians would get the vaccination as well, because it has huge impact on the Israeli society. So some people say that because they worry about the health of the Israelis, and others say that because they worry about the moral aspect of it. But Israel, first priority is Israel to vaccinate the citizen. But it seems there are more and more voices to repeat that and say that there would be a need for Israel to find a way to support and help the Palestinians to get the vaccination as well. And I really hope that Israel would do all in its efforts to make sure that it would happen.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
So it's a double question, because you said something I just want to ask you to elaborate on. What did you mean when you said about evangelicals thinking that Jesus is the only way to heaven? Are you saying that Christianity doesn't say that other than evangelicals? This is the first thing.
No. I'm saying that if a rabbi think that evangelical Christians don't expect the recognition of Jesus by Jews toward the end of the days, it's ignoring the faith of evangelical Christians, because most of the evangelical Christians who are very Zionist and supportive of Israel would find it hard to accept the concept that Jews can enter the kingdom of heaven without be justified by Jesus, through Jesus. And if you have a problem with that, you have to be aware that many of the Zionist Christians who support Israel expect that or hope for that. They will not do anything about it, maybe, but that's part of their faith, and you cannot ignore that. And it's absolutely, it makes sense. They are Christians after all.
Yeah, but I'm saying all of Christianity is based on the premise that Jesus is the Messiah, and without him there is no other way, regardless of denomination. But I hear it, because they're supporting. You mean because evangelicals are directly supporting?
Right. So I'm saying, no one thinks that Catholic would give up the hope that everyone would accept. The Catholic actually have a different answer for Jews, because the official sorry, the Cardinal Koch was, I think, saying that you know, when you ask about what would happen with the Jews, he said this is God's problem. I mean, the Jews are a different case, but with the Catholic, it's obvious. With evangelical Christians, some Orthodox rabbi would ignore that and say, no, they don't accept, they don't hope, they don't expect us to accept Jesus toward the end. And this is ignoring the reality, because obviously if they're Christian, they think that we have to accept Jesus in order to enter the kingdom of heaven.
Right.
I have
And the question, 1 second, sorry, I was just asking you to elaborate on this. The question is there any initiatives on the concept of bringing Jews and Christians together to also address, what you mentioned in the beginning, that particularly Eastern Christians have faced persecution from Jews? Is that ever addressed or apologized for, as, for example, other things? For example,
what do you mean?
Western Europe. Yeah, I'll explain. For example, Western Europe have even apologized for some of the suffering, particularly the Holocaust, but I've never heard anything to do with a particular Israel or the Jewish nation history coming to say, well, we're sorry we killed you guys in the beginning of, or we persecuted the early Christians.
In the early church.
Particularly also the founder of Christianity himself, Jesus, who was persecuted. Does it ever, is it ever brought, because that's, if we want to address the roots as well, which is called roots, that's part of, like we Eastern Christians. I'm an Eastern Christian, a Palestinian Christian, Arab, Aramaic, Armenian, Egyptian, Coptic, living in the Christian quarter. I'm from here. And I'm all of this because my mother is Egyptian Coptic, my grandmother is Aramaic, my father is Armenian, I'm Palestinian. So
I see about your family name.
Yeah, we Eastern Christians, we never persecuted the Jews. Not only that, we're still persecuted until today, and we were persecuted in the very early. And this is never mentioned. So I'm just guessing if this is ever addressed, because you mentioned things like, like the Palestinian Christians say, why are you asking to remove the cross? Well, and I hear you, like we may not understand those things. I do understand them now, but in general, we may not. But to be asked to remove something which is the foundation of our faith, to enter into our church, is offensive. And so is those victim mentality of the Jews addressed? Because we're always, guys, are speaking to us as if you're victims, which you mentioned it slightly, but we are victims in many layers. And this is not a competition of a victimhood, but I'm saying, where's the apology? Where's the coming and addressing, hey, the fault here, or to address the healing or the...
So I agree with you that we have a competition of who is more victim and who has to ask apology from whom. And, you know, we're never going to end with that, because, and I'm going to get back to your question about Jesus in the first question, but I would say, well, you're Egyptian and, you know, you have to apologize for what you did for us in Egypt when we were slaves there for 400 years. But of course, we will never end with that. And I think that I absolutely agree, or we have to stop speaking the language of victim and victimized and being victimized, and start to move together toward the future, not forgetting or forgiving, but just moving on. And I think as Israeli, and I do what I do because I care about the Israeli society, and I want the Israeli society to go through a process of healing and build confidence and say, well, we are strong, we have a state, we did some bad thing, and I'm talking about the last 70 years, not about the first century. We have to take responsibility and then move on. We'll never be able to compensate for what happened, but we have to take responsibility and move on. That's something I said. But to go back to the Bible, to the New Testament, to the story of Jesus, that would be theologically very, very complicated. And in order to recognize that we're responsible for the crucifixion of Jesus, that's something that not only the Catholic Church do not recognize anymore, but Jews would never recognize it, because actually, I mean, I ever even heard that from the late Coptic Archbishop of Jerusalem, who said, well, we don't have to blame the Jews for killing Jesus. Jesus himself crawled on the cross. He had to die on the cross, and we cannot blame the Jews for that. And I think it's a theological issue. It's not a historical issue. And therefore, I would not open that for a discussion, but I would say, let's not try to check who was more victim for more years in the past. Let's take responsibility for what happened in the last 100 years and move on from there. And recognizing that there are certain, I think, mental issues, social issues, psychological issues that we maybe do not understand. And maybe you don't understand why it's so, the Holocaust is such an important part of my identity, and why the fact that we lived as minority and persecuted in Europe still form the way I relate to Christians who are Eastern Christians and suffered a lot here in the Middle East for so many years. And you would not understand this psychology, and I would never understand your psychology as a minority here for 1,300 years and what you have suffered as a minority here. So maybe that's another thing we have to do. We have to recognize that we won't be able to understand each other, but again, to find a way to move toward, to move on, and to go through a healing process, both communities.
Yes, just to...
You understand? You get what I'm saying? So, but I think,
I'm commenting, but I agree with your approach. I'm just saying, is it addressed? Is it ever... and I'm not speaking even regardless now of Jesus as a person. The early Christians, the church in 66 AD almost vanished by the Jewish persecution, but except it was for the Roman war that started that got the Jews really... I'm not trying to speak like negative language. I'm just trying to say, are we really addressing? Because the Jewish people, I hear them, I understand, I sympathize, I mean the word maybe better than I understand, like they're suffering, they're mentioning it, but they're still mentioning it, and they're being the oppressor today, at least to us still Palestinian Christians. And we've never taken part in persecuting them. You mentioned me being Egyptian. I'm not Egyptian, I'm speaking about the Copts, Christian Copts, not ethnic. We're speaking Jewish Christian relations, not ethnic problems. So when like Armenian, I'm speaking as a Christian Armenian, not as even Armenian ever maybe hurt a Jew or no. So the Eastern Christianity did not really persecute the Jews in general, those particular groups I mentioned. So is that addressed? Because otherwise, if it's not addressed and it's mishmash, then the Jews should never mention also their suffering. And then it becomes, no, rather we should also all mention, but with justice, with a sense of sympathy for all and moving on, not like, oh, let's ignore this. And
so that's what I'm saying. So we don't have, we have to listen to the other. And you will have at a certain point, you will have to talk about what you think about Jews and how you feel about what happened to the early Christian community in the Holy Land and in the first century. And it would be, and I'm saying, I think that we have to be able to listen to that. And even if we agree with that or not agree with that, historically or religiously or whatever, but we have to be, we Jews have to be able to sit together and listen to Mr. Marizian and said, yes, if that's something that is painful for you and that's part of your identity and that's part of the way you perceive yourself as a Christian in the Middle East and in relation to Jews, I'm here to listen to that. It's hard for me, but I'm listening to that. And I'm not gonna, I can, I don't know if I can take responsibility for something that happened 2,000 years ago, as I don't think that you have to take responsibility or a German have to take responsibility for what happened 100 years before his time, but I'm just saying we should be able to sit together and I should be able to hear you saying, I have bad memories from Jews because not only they persecute us now as Palestinians, but they also persecute us in the first century. And I have to be able to listen to that. But at the same time, I expect you to be able to listen to me talking about how difficult it was to be a Jew in Poland or in Hungary, or how my grandparents suffered in the Holocaust. And that's where the dialogue can start. And then we can be able to, so it's not just talking about how you suffer as Palestinian and how difficult it maybe is for me to be Jewish, but also to talk about the pains of the past, and we both have to be able to listen to that. And that's what I'm saying. If you come to the dialogue and just expect me to take responsibility for what happened in the first century or what happened now, but you're not able to hear what I have to say, we won't be able to talk. You have to listen to me and I have to listen to you in order to be able to open ourselves to sympathize to each other's pain in order to be able to continue.
We've gone far over time, and that's fantastic. That's a sign that this has been riveting and fascinating and engaging. And thank you really very much, Hana. I think that many people have further questions. The time is over. If you want to, if you're able to put your email in the chat box, and those who want to respond with you can ask questions. And
I will just open the first slide in my presentation. There you have, I think, all the details. So the Facebook page of JCJCR, which is my project where I update, here it is. Okay, so you have here my email and the website of the Rossing Center. And you're welcome to follow the Facebook page of the Rossing Center and the JCJCR. The JCJCR page is in Hebrew, but you have to Google Translate. And I try to update with news about Christians and Christianity in the Holy Land. The Rossing page in Facebook is in English. And the website, you have my email. You're welcome to write if you have any further question. You're welcome to join us tomorrow. I put in the chat the invitation for tomorrow's session that we have about dialogue and activity. Between dialogue and activity, yes, and I would be happy to keep in touch and to hear more from you and to your perspective, and you're welcome.
So thank you, Hana, so much. And actually, it's a double thank you both to you and to the Rossing Center, because last week we had Dr. Sarah Bernstein, so we now have a series of 2 veterans from the Rossing Center that have engaged us and challenged us and enriched us. Thank you. I just want to mention, of course, that Roots Shorshim Judur has been the sponsor of tonight's session, like we have every Sunday night. Please look at our website, friendsofroots.net, www.friendsofroots.net. And those of you who are able to donate to Roots, we greatly appreciate it. We have our donate page there on the website. Of course, we can't continue these Sunday presentations without your support. We've been getting support from many of you, and we welcome further support. Lastly, I want to mention our presentation next week. Same day, same time, just a week later. Next week, it's Malmo, Sweden, a model of Jewish-Muslim partnership and brotherhood. We'll be hearing from Imam Salahuddin Barakat and Rabbi Moshe David HaKohen, respectively the Muslim leader and the Jewish leader in Malmo, Sweden. They'll be talking about their friendship and their interfaith dialogue and how their efforts of spreading understanding between Jews and Christians throughout the city have actually contributed to lowering the incidence of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in the city. So please, if you're able, join us next week, Sunday again at the same time. So thank you very much again to Hana and all our participants, all the people in the audience, and hopefully we'll see you next week.
If someone wants to have the presentation, just send me an email and I will send you the presentation.
Great,
So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very, very important.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very interesting. Thank you very much.